now let's talk about China.
Yes. Last thing. So with the new year, we're going to be getting a lot of important data coming out about what happened in 2023. And one of the most important pieces that has come out recently, one of the things that I had my eye on the most, is how much did China's population decline in 2023? It declined for the first time ever in 2022. And now we learned that their population declined by over 2 million people in 2023, which is enormous. It was 9 million births, 11 million deaths. If you look at the graph on this, you see a precipitous decline in the birth rate since 2016 that has just continued to go down, and deaths just keep on rising. And they've been rising since I think the early 2000s because China's demographics are completely screwy, where every decade of age, basically like 70 to 80, 60 to 70, the further up you go, the more people there are. And there are also a bunch of these cultural issues and policy issues from the past that now are discouraging people not only from getting married, but then from having kids. So China obviously hastened its demographic problem with the one-child policy, which pushed down birth rate over several decades. But the rule also created generations of only child girls who were given an education and employment opportunities, which turned them into empowered women who are very reluctant to, they're resistant to the ideas coming down from government at the top that they should be pushed back into the home. She, though, has still been urging government officials to persuade women to return to the traditional roles in the home. But the problem is China also has deep-seated gender inequality that discourages women from getting married and from having kids. One woman said, "It seems that the government's birth policy is only aimed at making babies, but doesn't protect the person who gives birth. It does not protect the rights and interests of women."
That's really interesting.
When that's the scenario, when that's the context you're in, you don't want to put yourself at the mercy of not only the dangerous proposition of childbirth, but also of being in a relationship with a man. Women cite widely reported domestic violence by men as their rationale for not getting married, and there are plenty of pieces of evidence, there are plenty of instances of the justice system siding with men, and the laws being set up to make it harder for women to be safe in their marriages. So,
wow, this is crazy. I never really took this is something I take for granted for being in America, right? Is the Violence Against Women Act.
yeah,
Right? Like that's something that China, I guess, doesn't have or doesn't have an equivalent to, that women feel safe in their own home and free from domestic violence.
exactly. Yeah, so it's there are plenty of instances of domestic violence, and they feel like they can't easily get out because the government recently instituted a 30-day cooling off period before divorces go into effect, because they are trying to keep families together, because they think the birth rate is such an issue.
Well, that's not how you fix that.
Exactly. So what's happening? Like there was one story of a woman who was murdered by her husband.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, this seems like a 30-day period where the husband can plan the murder of his wife.
Literally. No, that's exactly what happens. And there are popular sayings online now that are like, a marriage license has become a license to beat, and they're reinforced by these news reports.
Whoa.
So China's now in this position. Culturally, they have these women who are empowered and who, even though they've been trying to send this propaganda that women should stay in the home, that they should be in traditional family roles, women have had access to the internet for too long, and this feminist movement has built up online so that they aren't aligned with that kind of messaging from the government. There's really nothing they can do. I don't think there's anything they can do to make women feel more incentivized to have children, except really liberalize their country, but now the problem is it's too embedded in their culture to
now
not
it's like,
have families.
Now it's in their mentality. Now they're like against marriage on principle, which I don't blame them. I mean, like what China needs, they need a Violence Against Women Act, and they need to enact no fault divorce like the United States has.
Exactly.
That's what they need to do. They need to liberalize that so women feel more empowered and more safe in these marriages.
But even then, it's gonna take a lot of time,
Yes,
right?
so that's just a legislative initiative.
Yeah.
Then you have to change the culture, which is downstream from legislation, right?
Yep.
It takes a lot longer time for, if you do progressive legislation, for that to seep into the cultural mindset.
Yeah.
Right? Think about how long it took for people to understand, Social Security, retiring benefits. Like, think about how long it takes for people to comprehend the legislation that gets passed and its implementation and what it means.
Yeah.
Another big issue with this is the low youth unemployment rate.
Yep.
It's very hard for young people to start families in China because the youth unemployment rate is so high. The last piece of data that we had, I think, was in a couple quarters ago, and it had youth unemployment at 25%.
Yeah.
And then recently we got new numbers, youth unemployment being at 18%. Well, that's weird. How did it drop so fast? Well, it's because their unit of measurement changed. Yeah. Now they measure unemployment. They don't count people who were in school. So if you're in school, they don't count you as unemployed. That's fine. That's a fine way to do it. But all they did was cook the books. They haven't changed the past numbers to represent the same measuring stick.
Yeah. And also, this is all with the general caveat that any data that comes out of China is extremely unreputable. And we use it because it's all we have, but they've been known to cook the books for a long time. And that's a whole other discussion that we could have to talk about why that happens. But you kind of have to adjust down every number they put out.
Yeah, and so now we're getting the situation you have low youth unemployment, so it's very hard for people to start families in the first place, be able to move out of their place and get an apartment, get a home. Now it's like our issue that we have in the United States, but to a much larger extent in China.
Yeah.
Right. And with the declining birth rate and the declining population, we're going to have a lot of problems coming out of China. They're going to have a really hard time being able to pay the pensions of their older residents, right?
Yep.
Paying for the healthcare costs of all these older people. And China has the lowest retirement age in the world. Chinese people retire at 55, which means their workforce just shrinks faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see if China goes through with some type of pension reform where they raise the retirement age and what that does. We saw raising the retirement age in France and what that did to that country. They went up in flames.
Yeah.
I only imagine what would happen in China.
Well, China's just going to, more and more of these reforms as its system as it currently is becomes untenable, are going to squeeze the people harder. And we know from history, like the more you squeeze, the more likely you are to create a revolution.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's just kind of a matter of time to see what is the straw that breaks the camel's back.
This youth unemployment rate is a really interesting figure for me because there is a whole theory of how revolutions happen, and people ask why. There's a Marxian theory, right, about like oppression, and there's a whole bunch of other theories, and one that I've always thought interesting, not knowing if I agree with it, but one that I always think is interesting is like the overeducation problem, where you overeducate a large portion of your country, but you don't have any place to put them. So you give people these great educations, you get them to learn a lot, read a lot, give them all these skills, and then they have no place to use those skills in the economy. And they get frustrated because they gave up so many years of their lives learning so many things, and they think I could run the country better, but they're not given the chance to prove it. And that breeds revolution, because this is one of the things that was happening in Russia prior to their revolution. Was you had a university system that was getting more and more open, which was creating more and more middle class, that eventually led into a revolution.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah. So the last thing I think I want to say is, how does this affect climate change? Because with the declining population, I think we're going to be looking at a China that is actually half of what it is now. Like, I think 600 million by
600 million.
Yeah, 600 million by 2100. I think a total
by 2100. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
600 million Chinese people
That's
by
crazy.
the end of 20.
That's less than half of what they have right now.
Right. I think it's something around there. It might be 700, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's around that. How does that affect climate change? Because that means that, the Chinese usage of energy is going to go down.
Yeah. The problem is how climate change modeling works is that it's about the tipping points, right? And the concern is how close we are to the tipping points right now that, for example, destroy all of the polar ice caps.
Right.
And so it's all a race against time. And I don't think China's population, its population decline will help somewhat, but they're still a country of 1.4 billion.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to have a significant difference as far as how quickly we hit those tipping points, because they're too close.
Right,
We're
right,
too
right.
close to them.
No, I understand.
Yeah.